In this episode, I am embarking on quite a long thought process I've had around how are men really doing in this journey of becoming a father. There is, of course, so much focus in the work that I do on women, and that is where my passion has started and is continuing to thrive. But there is no doubt that over the years, I have noticed that there seemed to be a gap, quite a black hole when it comes to the support that men are receiving in that experience of seeing their partner go through pregnancy, experiencing birth, and of course, the postpartum and fatherhood. So over the years, I've been wanting to speak to fathers to hear what their experiences are, what have worked for them, what didn't work for them, what were the challenges and what was the joys. And this episode is going to be the first, I hope, of many to explore this concept of men's health when it comes to pregnancy, birth, and the postpartum. So I am excited to share this episode with you, where I am speaking with Tony Toe, who is a friend. He's also a doula client. I have supported him and his family through 2 births, and his wonderful wife, Jess Osey, is featured on the podcast a few episodes back about meditation and motherhood. So you can go back and listen to that. Tony is a devoted and dedicated husband and father of 2. Tony is a professional executive coach, facilitator, and leadership expert. He has created ManTribe, which you can find online, which is mantribe.com.au, a 4 months facilitated group journey for men. And he's also embarking on creating a DadTribe, which you will hear about in the conversation we had together. At this stage, in November 2022, DadTribe is not up and running yet, but if you're listening in 2023 or onwards, I would definitely go on to mantribe.com.au and reach out to Tony and learn more about DadTribe. And if you are looking to get support and explore fatherhood on a deeper level, then that is definitely the place to go. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope that you enjoy this conversation. I know that I did. Hi, Tony. Thank you so much for coming onto the podcast. This has been actually years in the making on my end. I've been wanting to speak to fathers about this experience that men go through as they become fathers. And so I'm actually really, really honored that you're the one to start this conversation with me. So thank you, Tony, for coming.
It's such a pleasure, AM. And it's, as you say that, I've been thinking, how cool would it be to have this is one voice of a father, but how cool would it be to have like a number of fathers that have had different experiences to provide kind of some normalization around what fathers go through. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And that was, I don't know if you remember, but initially my thought was to interview lots of different fathers and hear their journeys and experiences, but that became a very big project. And so I think this might be the first of many one-to-one interviews, hopefully. I think I feel the need to bring much more awareness to how men experience the journey of pregnancy, which is not happening within their body, but seeing their partner go through pregnancy for 9-10 months, birth, and the postpartum. And as I was doing the research for our conversation, this need was really backed up by the research, because I realized that there is not a questionnaire or a way to check in with men. It is not here. It's not invented yet.
Yeah.
And that is kind of shocking, I think, that we don't have a way of actually knowing what is the criteria for postpartum depression in fathers. I mean, that's not good. So anyways, here we are.
I feel you so big time. And I think, like, as you were talking, something that emerged for me is I don't think that, it's not like you can most men can turn to their own father and be like, so like, let provide some counsel on, there's such a generational difference in the way that fathers these days are balancing being involved to support through pregnancy, being involved in birth. Often dads one generation up weren't even in the birth room. And then in the postpartum, in terms of managing work and the balance of like all of that stuff is different. So the initiation looks so different. And so that kind of, it's not, I as you're talking, I was thinking of my own dad, and it's like, I love him, but I can't really talk to him because he's had a totally different experience of being a father.
Yeah. So it's this generation of men is doing it on their own for the first time in the birth space. And I mean, that's so significant that exactly what you say, that where do a man turn to say, what am I going to expect? Like, what's going to happen? What does it look like? All of this. But before we go there, because this is, I know we're both very passionate about this, I wanted just to say, get to know a little bit more about you for the listeners and who you are, Tony. And I mean, I've invited you on here because I have been your doula for the two births of your very sweet children. And I'm very honored to call you and your family my friend and friends of mine now. So, and we've talked about these, of course, your birth experiences and so many rabbit holes of this experience that we all go through in parenthood. We've talked about for hours together. And that's why I thought it would be so juicy to have you on. But tell the listeners a little bit more about you so that they get a little insight into who you are.
Yeah, for sure. I always, whenever people ask that question, it's like, how will I define myself today in this moment? So maybe my dad's stats. So as you said, I've got two kids, a 4-year-old and a 4-month-old, and beautiful partner Jess Ozzie, and I'm a facilitator and coach for a living. I work for a consulting firm, and then probably my really passionate work is the work I do outside of that with men. So have observed in my own life as I've got older, and in so many of the lives of men around me, how we've become more remote, like male friendships have become more remote. And so that's probably, that's the work that kind of keeps the fire in the belly for me going, to bring groups of men together and to do some deep work with them in a way that probably is not generally supported by our culture. Yeah.
Beautiful. And just on that, what's the outcome when you facilitate these groups in terms of bringing men back together? Like what transformation happens within them? I know this, we don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but what are you experiencing as this journey, as you're bringing them back in together? What do you experience on the other side of it in these men's groups?
It's kind of amazing. Like it's almost so there's the impetus for it was a great experiment to say, well, what would happen if we brought men together in a way that was radically psychologically safe, where the barriers to having regular communication around things that are real, like going beyond pub talk, going beyond all of the kind of general kind of, oh yeah, but it's all good kind of dialogue, to actually have the real conversations around challenges around intimacy. We had a group of men here. I'm thinking I've short-term memory loss because I've been a parent for the first time, so I can remember about the last 24 hours. I had a group, I'm working with a current group, and we sat around the fire about 5 meters from where I am right now, and we talked about sexuality, and men got to air some of the shame they hold and the grief they hold and the challenges around their sexuality, and it's so shared. So I guess the transformation is sometimes men will take on new things, but it's actually more just the sense of peacefulness in the world with that actually it's really normal. Like all of the stuff that we experience in isolation is really normal. To me, that's a great psychological achievement. Just that, like it doesn't, because the orientation for men is often to fix things, and that happens in the groups as well, where men are like, oh, have you done this and do this, and that's great. That's also part of it. But I think that if you say what is it, it's being more at ease in the world with where they are on all fronts. Their sense of purpose, whether they're married or they have kids or they haven't parented well, like just to know that all of that stuff is just it's actually normal and they're not the only ones, even though it feels like it because they're not communing with others. Yeah. Yeah.
That's all it takes. We just don't want to be alone. We want to just meet each other, don't we? That's beautiful to hear. Should we dive in? And do you want to share as much or as little about your birth experiences? And I think with the intention of this podcast, I suppose, is of course for men and women, but I would love it to be a reference point or something that other new fathers to be could tune in and listen to this and sort of just get some of those ideas and thoughts and conversations that they're not perhaps able to have anywhere else. So with that perspective, do you want to share a little bit about the experiences you had around, well, I'm really interested to hear about the experience as, watching your partner transform during pregnancy. And of course the birth, and we'll dive into the postpartum later on in the questions. But if you want to touch a little bit on that, that would be amazing.
Definitely. And I'll preface it by saying I'm going to be really honest with your listeners in saying that so Anna Maria, as a dear friend of our families, will know what's going on within our family pretty quickly because of her friendship with Jess. And we've been like properly kind of going through the initiation of the second birth. And so she very generously messaged me yesterday saying, I know you guys have just been going through so much. Do you still want to do the podcast? And we agreed that it would be actually a perfect time to do the podcast. But the reason I say that is because I want people to know that it's from that vantage point that this conversation's happening. If it was happening 6 months ago, I'd be doing it from the vantage point of like, oh, we've had a child and we've gone through the initiation of the first child and we've kind of integrated. So I feel like we're not fully integrated in our second initiation. So take all of what you hear in that context. Yeah.
Perfect.
I guess maybe just a little bit, and like feel free to pry, and we can go wherever we need to go in terms of the births. So very very different experiences. I guess the first thing I'd say on pregnancy, and this probably carries true for the whole experience I've had of this journey of becoming a father and through pregnancy and birth, is that the initiation for me didn't really happen during pregnancy. Like it did, like I didn't feel big change. It was like just watching Jess's belly become more distended didn't change anything internally for me. And I wanted to invoke, like I value rite of passage. I wanted to like be step, but it didn't, like I didn't feel that. And even the birth, which was extraordinary, and we can talk to it, I didn't feel like in that moment transformed. So I think I guess I'm really aware that the journey that men and women go through, at least the journey that I went through and Jess went through, were different phases into the initiation, where Jess was being initiated the whole way through. And for me, it was kind of like, it was very delayed. So I just wanted to share that. But so two very different births, our two births. The first birth was a hospital birth, and that came with the comfort of knowing that we had a whole medical system behind us, and it also came with the grief of having to navigate that system. And so that first birth had a lot more interference and was a lot less peaceful, having reflected on the second one as well. Our second birth was a home birth, so we had two private midwives and you, as we had for the first one, and it was a lot more peaceful the whole way through the process, the lead up to and the birth itself. So I think that's probably the starting point. Was there were very different experiences, and in the first one, I remember feeling this tension with you of like, where is the edge of where I should be asking questions versus just letting the hospital system and protocol unfold in the way that it's supposed to, and just trust that that's what's meant to happen, versus this feeling of background as well. So I work as a facilitator often in New South Wales Health, so I know a lot about the health system and protocol and the kind of the fear around litigation that goes on. And so I was really aware of that going into kind of the experiences, and I think that kind of also maybe is a factor in the process of kind of like being, well, where is it you just surrender versus where do you actually need to ask questions? So I felt like it was trying to navigate. Felt like the first one was trying to navigate an environment, whereas the second one wasn't. The second was far more logistically challenging because we had Indy. So it was like, when is it going to happen? And how are we going to, if it happens at this time of day, where are we going to be? And who do we speak to? And who will be our birth support, and all of that kind of thing. And I guess the final, this is my kind of rambling stream of consciousness. The final thing I think that was very different in my experience of the two births was the first one. So it's so overwhelming. Like the experience is so overwhelming of experiencing a person in labor. I just had this, as I'm sharing with you, I had this memory of the first birth. I just remember being in hospital at one of our midwifery visits. And I think we'd done like some little birthing thing at the hospital, which was not great. It's like an education thing. And or maybe it was on lactation or something like that. And Jess went to the bathroom. We were downstairs at the Royal in Randwick, the Women's Hospital. And a woman who is, I now know, in active labor, but I hadn't done any birth education at that point. She walks in like half dressed and then like has a contraction in the hospital waiting room. And Jess isn't there. And I'm like, oh my God, thank God she's not here. And it was like absolutely terrifying. I was like, what the hell? She like walks in, has a contraction, walks off. I'm like, what was that? What the hell was that?
That's hilarious.
And I think even with the birth education, and we can talk to that, it was amazing. The first birth, I felt I felt so overwhelmed and out of control, and my impulse was to want to like just feel like I could somehow be in control in the scenario. So I just remember like having my phone and being like, it's like timing contractions, like with the app, like just like, and eventually just like in the middle of the throes of pre-labor, I was like, can you put your phone down? And I couldn't really, I felt like I needed to know when was the transition point, because we needed to go to like, and that's part of the first birth as well. Like, when is she in active labor? 3 contractions in 10 minutes. Like, was that 3 and 10? I don't know. Like, but then one of them was 5 minutes, the other one was 2, and like, and I just remember that feeling of like overwhelm and maybe not trusting the process enough of the unfolding labor. And then the second one, not needing to do that, which was really, really nice. Yeah, really nice not to feel like I had to be managing the because it's like, here's an image that comes to mind. It's like birth is like a wild ocean, and my experience, at least as a man in that context, is like a rubber duck, like kind of bobbing around. And I'm like timing contractions, and the first one, rubber duck, keeps thrown around, and I'm trying to like cut timing contractions.
I love that analogy. That's going to stay with me for a long time. The rubber duck, and yeah. I really, I can feel that, and it resonates with me as a support person in birth, and that the role of the partner, which, I tend to get very detailed updates on when and where the contractions are, because it's very true. It's sort of, what are the tools for the man where, your partner is changing in front of your eyes, making sounds, doing movements that you probably didn't expect or may not have seen before. And sort of, I want to use the word scrambling to find a way to either fix or help or do something, but there the phone is, and the timer is a great tool. And so I know you're not alone on that one.
Something to hold on to, it's like, yeah, I can't possibly control this, what's going on, but I can find these gaps between contractions. I can definitely do that.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, it's I have this memory of, in our second birth, of looking around our birth room. We're in our bedroom, and seeing you, like the most active physically in supporting Jess, which is the touch that she wanted, was a feminine, knowing touch. And I'm convinced that there is like literally like hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years of body knowledge of women supporting women in birth. So it's like there is a sympathetic vibration of having a woman's touch in birth that I just have not either just have not been able to provide or I'm not meant to be providing. But I remember having a moment where you were fit, like she was in the birth pool and you were physically providing kind of like that counter pressure to her. And Jess and I had probably half an hour where it was just like, wow, like this is happening. Like this is happening. And now I know what's on the other side. So it's not like an initiation where it's like you don't know. It's like, wow, there's a whole universe that's about to explode. And there was something amazing about that half hour. I'm very grateful to have had the moment in that second birth to be able to pause and be like, actually, I remember tearing up a few times being like, wow, this is happening. Like, this is amazing. I heard on a podcast, someone said, the average human who's like doing extreme exercise, it's like the intensity is like a 4 or 5 out of 10. And like an Olympian, if they were like going through like their absolute height of pinnacle extreme sport would be like a 6. And then a birthing woman is like a 10, a full-blown 10 out of 10. And yes. I remember this feeling like around the second one that we just had, where it was less overwhelming, being like, oh my God, there's nothing that Jess will need that won't be met after the birth. Like she's going to have, and of course there are lots of things needs that haven't been met. But I remember in that moment being like, just like wow, like this, there's like it's like I can't believe what I'm watching here. I can't believe this, and what she's going through to like bring life to our family. Yeah, it's extraordinary.
Do you feel like you didn't have that moment with the first birth experience? No,
not at all. Not at all.
A bit more duck in the water and a bit more sort of navigating the system and
completely
experience.
Yeah, and to be fair on myself of 4 years ago, that transition to the hospital is challenging. Like that like moment where it's like, okay, we're going now. It's like, and I just remember thinking, how the F are we going to get up from here and get into a car now and drive to a hospital? And like,
yeah.
Oh, the drive, hilarious. Just being like, can you go slower? It's like, I'm going at like 10 kilometers an hour at 2 a.m. It's like, there is no way if I'm going slower, it's like, we aren't going to get to the hospital.
Yeah, so true.
Like the whole thing was, there's just so many things happening, and it's just, you can't, I felt like I couldn't breathe in that process. Yeah.
You said something very early on in terms of the delayed experience. I don't know if that's what you said, but there was like a delayed knowing for you in that pregnancy birth journey, where it's sort of, and I want to talk about that because that is so relevant for all men that I have met on my journey, which is now hundreds, and everyone. So this is where I think the gap is in terms of talking about this more with men and supporting men in their experience, because it's definitely not going to be the same as the woman. So it's not about making it the same, or that men should be reading all the books or necessarily listening to all the podcasts. I think men have a different experience, and this is part of me also exploring what that is. But what I want to really emphasize here is that men have a delayed sort of cognition that this is happening. And in a way, I want to normalize that, because it can be really hard on the women. It can be really hard for us to, in some ways, do it alone within the relationship, because everything carries on. But pretty much from week 7, a woman is pretty affected by her hormones.
Yeah. And
she knows that the world is different inside of her. And so there, the download starts very, very early on, and it's this snowball. And that is very hard to translate to a partner or to anyone, really. And so I just see that often being a friction point and sort of a bit of sadness, and most definitely friction. So I just wanted to sort of say that, because you articulated it so well, that you didn't have much, you know, that not much changed for ages. So that's really relevant.
That initiation for me, and I think you really like the second, and we can talk about the second, like this initiation has been so full on, but it's not been the initiation to becoming a parent. That happens the first time. And I remember it hit me probably 2 months after the birth. That was the first moment. It was like, I was like, I knew it was just chaos afterwards because you're trying to like change nappies and, oh my God, I need to share this moment because I've laughed with other dads about this. The moment when you leave the hospital, if you have a hospital birth, which many people do, the moment after your first birth, when you leave the hospital and you've been there maybe for 3 days and like, you know, you've got all this support with like how to breastfeed, and it's like, you're now like about to take a chop, like, and it's like, are you sure that we should be, are you sure we should be doing this? Like, it's like, I feel like there should be more like robust processes to make sure that we're going to leave now with this. So I just wanted to share that. But about like maybe 2 months after, I remember sitting on our living room couch in our dining room and just crying, like actually just bawling. And it wasn't because of something in particular. Like there might have been a trigger, like I wanted to exercise. And it was like I just couldn't get out because it was like I felt too guilty to leave. And then if I left, I'd like feel maybe just as resentful that I'm going to exercise when she hasn't had a shower in 3 days. And I just felt this grief around like, oh, like that life is gone. That life is like utterly gone. And I actually wrote a poem that I've revisited a few times called Homeless in My Living Room, because of this feeling of being displaced in my environment and feeling like I'm giving my heart and soul to Jess, and she's giving her heart and soul to this baby. And this support mechanism is so fragile. Like we've just like me to her and her to the baby. And that's kind of like, we've got, and we like to be fair, like have probably more village than almost anyone around us in an urban context. And it still felt like that kind of wow. And so, yeah, I think for me, the initiation really happened. The birth itself is an initiation, of course, but for me, it happened in the aftermath. It happened in the weeks and months and the hundreds of moments where you realize, oh, I can't just plan a picnic tomorrow morning and then go on a picnic. Like that can't just happen anymore. Or we can't just go on a date. All of those kind of moments, and the moment I'll always remember, there was a midwife right at the end of our pregnancy. She wasn't even our primary midwife. This was the first birth through the hospital. And she said to us, "What are you guys doing tonight?" At the end of our appointment, we're like, "Oh, we got no plan." She was like, "Go to a movie. Go have dinner in a movie." And we did it. We did. And just before we left, she said, "Oh, by the way, like I might not see you again," and we didn't. And I'm always grateful to her. She said, "You know, you're going to have some resentments build up in your relationship after the birth, and you need to know that that's normal." And I remember being like, you don't know us. Like, maybe for the average couple, but not for us. And we did. We had all these kind of and after a long time, when we realized there was like all these little resentments that were building up about like, oh, you didn't like clean the dishwasher and I hadn't done this, and like, oh, you said I could exercise and then I didn't. All the little like normal stuff when we're just everyone's on their edge, and it's like, well, actually it's just two people struggling. And so the nature when you're suffering is to say, how do you discharge that blame to someone else? We went on a date and we did something that was really good. We were like, this is our first date. I think we were like 6 months after. We're like, okay, let's lay it on. Like, let's just go and let's just like all your petty resentments, just like share that. Let's just do it. And we laughed. Like we actually laughed at how ridiculous some of this stuff was. But and it was really healthy to do it because we still got to say it.
Yes.
And to laugh at
Great point.
You know, how ridiculous it was that we were feeling resentful because we knew it wasn't logical, but it was just like there. And yeah.
That's a beautiful thing. Maybe it should be scheduled in. I actually heard this advice just yesterday that couples really should have a minimum of 90 minutes per week to date, you could call it date or whatever, but really to connect and discuss all the affairs in the relationship, in the household, with the kids, if there is kids, and so on. And ideally that should be double that, so 90 minutes twice, because otherwise it's all the unsaid conversations that builds up as little monsters. And that is just truth. It's such a good idea to talk about things before they fester.
Yeah. And as you're saying that, there's definitely a different maturity this time around. The second time you would have that with 4, of knowing it's not forever, and like that less of that burn. But I also, as you're saying, the twice a week for 90 minutes, I'm like, oh, like there's just no like we couldn't find half an hour twice a week right now. And I'm playing out, well, what would that look like in the aftermath of a second birth or a first? But we probably found it more with the first one. But it was so in the throes of the initiation that it was like Netflix every day, like Netflix, and like the trashiest stuff we could find, the better. Just
that's part of the therapy, I think, too, though. And I think we also have to be realistic about which phase you would want to implement such relationship connection and conversations, because as you say, now with 2 almost a newborn and a toddler, you can't really do 90 minutes, especially not twice a week. However, I think it's good if there is some awareness, and it's great to hear you say how it was laughable how the petty things that you carried around and could share with each other, that they're going to be there regardless of how great your relationship is. There's always going to be something, because it's an incredibly challenging time. So if maybe 5 minutes would do, maybe that's better than nothing. I don't know. Maybe just the awareness will be good. But I think it's really helpful because it goes very much from 0 to 100, I think, for men, because there is that delayed experience, because men do not go through the pregnancy, do not go through the labor process in the same way. And then boom, on the other side, like you very touchingly said, okay, there's a new dynamic in our relationship. And it's a very emotional experience. And it can feel, I think, and this is, and I'm obviously not a man, and I draw on a lot of things that men have shared with me, and what I've seen is that, and what I've read is also that men can feel left out of that equation, because it's very much the woman's demand with the baby and that interaction, especially if there's breastfeeding. But either way, that I call it the invisible umbilical cord. It's tight and strong for quite some time in the postpartum, and again, it's invisible, so it's not graspable for men, I think. So it's so valuable to hear you say that. It's universal.
And I feel like it's like the initiation is inevitable. Like you can actually, there is no way. It's one of those things that there's no way around. You can only go through, because if you like, I'm coaching a dad, like work professional related executive coachee who is really uninvolved, and he stayed at kind of at arm's length, probably in a more traditional model, and that's really worked for them and their partnership. They've got a more traditional, but I think for most modern partnerships, that model won't work. And so if there's a resistance to the process of what's changing, or just, okay, well, I'll just let her do it until like, well, then you're going to deal with the relationship fallout,
Yes.
So it's the initiation has to happen. It's how, like, we're going to move from this room to the other room, and there's a passageway between it, and you can stop and look at the pictures along the way, but you're going to have to end up at the other room at some point. And that Jess and I had this chat a couple of days ago. We were like, oh my gosh, like there's so much grief in this second initiation for us, and the perpetual, like, it just it feels like it's coming at us. We've had I just want to be clear, like, I think we're painting like a really rough picture. It's like, it is the most extraordinary, and it's the best thing in the world. Like, it's literally the best thing in the world I've ever experienced. And it's like my whole sense of what's important in the world has changed in the best kind of way. And so I just want to make that clear. but that stuff everyone knows, hopefully everyone knows about.
Yes.
It's the other stuff around, well, And that conversation we had was around, well, like, as hard as it all is, we need to unravel. Like, we can't, the way we were as parents of one, moving to becoming a family of four, that's an initiation again. So it's like, the unraveling has to happen. And a new garment, something else will be woven, but we can't, if we keep holding on to the old one, it's just going to be a lot of friction for us. But that's hard, hey? Like, I've struggled to let go of like the stability that we arrived at kind of, 6 months ago, and the feeling of like, wow, we're like really being good parents, and like actually to allow the fact that, well, we won't be great parents always, and all of that stuff that comes with, yeah.
I think it's a fact that every time you feel like, okay, we've got this, something will happen in parenthood. I think it's really beautiful that you are sharing, the hard bits of it too, which is really what I want to, because I think it's very easy to pretend that it's just sweet and glorious to have these beautiful little critters. And of course it is. But I think there is a tendency to not talk about the pain, not talk about the feeling alone, not talk about being disconnected from your partner and all the other things. Obviously, we see that in men because there isn't even a protocol to talk to men. There's no funnel for a man. I mean, a woman goes through plenty of prenatal visits, and then postnatally, one could argue that women could deal with or have more postnatal care for sure. Especially if they're not doing a home birth or have a private midwife. But there is no appointments for men. There's zero. Wow. And so I guess I want to talk to you about preparing for that. So in terms of, the birth education and all the appointments that women get, for you as a man, and obviously I know what you've received in terms of prenatal appointments with me. I know you did some birth education, and you can share what you did and what you found helpful. But what are the things that you could, if you had a magic wand, what do you think? Was it enough what you got, basically? And if it wasn't, what would you need? I know this is really big.
I mean, my feeling on the birth education front is, like, first of all, it's imperative. This is going to sound really contradictory, and there's no way to prepare. I feel like it's kind of like, it's almost like reading about what it's like to swim is really interesting, because you can hear about like, oh, water's going to be cold and it's going to like feel different, and like you'll feel like different because your body's got different gravitational. It's like all that stuff's good, but then like you get into water and it's like, oh, this is the visceral experience of it. So I think that's the first thing. I guess there's two ways I could think of that, and I think maybe best to start with the process of leading up to birth and the birth. So there are a couple of things that we did. We did a course which I highly recommend to anyone listening, called She Births, run by a woman and her team, Nadine Richardson, and that was really useful on a number of fronts. Probably, first of all, we got to see births in the program. So it was like that experience I had in the hospital of this woman, which was my first experience of seeing a birth.
That was your first,
live. It was like, so that was really useful, because you got to, like, they share stories, birth stories and all of that. So I think that was really useful. Really useful to learn about the birth process as a man. I almost feel like that program, and also the doula support, which I'll get to in a moment, like those things are probably at least as much for the man, if not more. The doula is probably more the family system, but that birth education, I remember speaking to other dads to be at that program and being like, I think we all got more out of it than the partners did. They talked about the birth process, like what does pre-labor look like? What does active labor look like? What does transition? I think like, I'm all about being surrendered, and like, Jess is a meditation teacher, and like, you know what? It's like the first time that you're seeing a birth, it's like, give your mind and your body some ways to hold on to some things. So not being able to just be like, okay, I think this is pre-labor because I remember seeing this, and they talked, like, it gives you a little bit of peace of mind to know that process. And it also, I think, helped me to be a little bit more productive, because there's all these tools around, like, how can you support, and things you can practice in the lead up of tickles, and like, the reality is, actually, for Jess, she wanted that from you. I'd say 90% of the time in our births, and I don't know what it's like for other women. So it was still good for me to have that, and for us to practice it in the lead up, and for Jess to feel safe that I had her if she needed it. In terms of those tools, there was one thing that I got from that birth education program, that was probably the most important piece of advice I got from the perspective of birthing through a hospital, which was, you can always ask the question, what are your options? And we asked that question 4 or 5 times in that first birth, and it helped us to make some really good decisions, knowing that we had options, and that we could just ask, even though we weren't the birth experts, we could still ask the question, what are our options here? When we're getting, kind of feels like almost getting shuffled around into different, now we're going to go there, and now you're going to have an episiotomy, and all these things. It's like, well, hold on, like, can we slow down just a moment? So I think that was really useful. I am obviously an extreme advocate for doula support, and for the role that a doula plays, well beyond just a safe birth. So I would say a midwife, obstetrician definitely, but midwives, the prime role is to make sure that the mother is safe and the baby are safe, and that the baby is born safely. And definitely, that, I think that's reductive, because a midwife also needs to make sure they care for the woman. But primarily, my experience of it is to make sure that the birth process is safe. My experience of having a doula is an element of recreating some of the village that we don't have in our culture around the family system, because it is not just about physically surviving a birth, which 99 point whatever it is will. It's actually about in what style do you survive, do you go through it, and to what extent can you thrive psychologically and emotionally after it. And so there is this sense of who is paying attention to the entire environment, who's paying attention to what the dad needs, because he's having a meltdown right now, because in our second birth, Jess had, what was it called, vasovagal, like is that what it's called, like that experience where she fainted, which is kind of not extremely uncommon. It happens. But, I'm standing there, and Indy's like kind of in the room, our daughter, and it's like, it's pandemonium. And it's like, well, in that moment, having someone who is system focused, who's looking at the entire environment and paying attention to what needs to be there. The room was too noisy after the birth. And you were the one that was the intermediary to be able to help communicate with the midwives and others, say, can we bring the energy down? Like, it's this feeling of like the safety of being held. I don't know if that's your intent as a doula, but that's the experience that we had of having a doula. Having you.
Two things. Well, one, first, my intent as a doula is to reduce the chances of trauma, and for the whole experience to be as wholesome for the couple, for the individual within that relationship on the other side. And it can be and unfold in whatever way it needs to be, but both couples, both partners has to be supported and respected and seen during the process. And that is that, as a family that you were talking to there, that is how is the room feeling. It's massage, it's coffees and teas, it's all of it, because it's the feeling during the whole process that kind of puts the puzzle together in the aftermath. The other thing you commented on, that I just wanted to comment on because you've mentioned it twice, is how Jess was referencing my touch and support. And I just wanted to say for others also that is 9 out of 10 times what happens. And I think it's true that there is that feminine link to that knowing. We, generally speaking, men are a lot stronger than women and just have a different feel to the body. So I think that's what plays into it. It's not a reflection on partners or how good you are at, caring for your partner. It's just, it's the birth thing.
And I guess extending on that, I definitely in the first birth felt like a little bit like inadequate around like, well, what, like I'm not like just like a passenger. And I felt really included by you and by Jess, but it was just so clear that she needed your touch, and she needed like the midwife support. And I guess I wanted to say that I imagine other men having that experience, and to just know that's really normal. And in the second birth, I didn't feel that at all. And you were probably even more hands-on in the second birth. The second birth, I just remember looking around the birth room and being like, there's our midwife quietly in the background, just keeping tabs on how things are tracking. And our second midwife, who actually happened to be the same midwife from our first birth, both in the room, and you sitting there holding her physically and me holding her kind of emotionally. And it was just like, wow, this is how modern birth should happen. This is how it could, it could be for many. Like there's an emotional moment in the birth room. I remember looking around and being just like, wow, look at this. Like, look at this support in this room. So, yeah.
And I wonder if that is because second time around, there is an element of you knowing that you don't have to time the contractions to the same extent. You don't have to find your role as that bobbing duck in the ocean. You can actually just float next to your partner and experience her and be more present, perhaps, which I wonder if it's harder to achieve first time around, because it is quite an experience. I was going to say shocking. It's quite an overwhelming experience when you are navigating everything and trying to call upon, if you've done birth education courses or whatever else you've learned, try and call upon that to be the partner and be the support man, be the man for your partner. So yeah, I think it's healthy to hear that there can be that feeling of like, where do I click into that puzzle? Because birth has been done with women forever and a day, and it has very much been midwives and support people in various shapes and forms, but usually feminine.
Yes, yeah. And
so
I think my like the recommended attitude that I take now from the second birth and the first one is kind of be there to whatever extent. Like you can hold presence and just be a witness to the entire thing, and that's valuable in and of itself. That's enough. But like to be available to whatever extent it's useful, and to just be ready to be there as a physical support when needed, but not need to like intervene or be involved. I remember in the second birth spending quite a lot of time setting up a camera, because we changed. So the second we were going to birth up here in our studio, and like last minute, Jess was like, I'm not leaving the bedroom. It was like, oh, the pool's already up there. All right, let's shovel everything down. And then like the camera was set up. We'd set it up like 2 weeks before. So, and Jess is so happy to have that recording now. And that was like, that's in that moment, the most useful way of spending some time is to say, well, what's going to serve the environment here? Yeah.
So just quickly going back to, so in terms of how could you have felt more prepared? Were you sufficiently prepared? What could you imagine would look different for you as a man?
Honestly, I actually think we were as prepared as we could have been. Like we did some proper birth education outside of the hospital. We had you as our doula in the lead up, and you need to know that process of having that doula experience is that you've got them the whole way through. It's so valuable. So there's continuity of care the whole way through. And yeah, I actually don't think there's a lot more. We did a little bit of reading, I think, but not like, at the end of the day, you just got to like the rubber duck's going to be on the ocean. So it's like just chucking a book in the ocean doesn't change the waves.
It's so true. That is actually the biggest takeaway from this, is that rubber duck. I feel like you've just normalized that whole feeling by saying that. Perfect. What was it like seeing your woman go through this journey?
Yeah. I think really, really extraordinary, extremely beautiful, extremely terrifying at times. I mean, just our second pregnancy just had a lot of ligament pain, and that was really hard because it was like literally nothing I could do to help. Like I could get a hot bucket. It's like it really. So I think just I maybe keep coming back to, like, there's such a relinquishing of control in all of this, and I think really confronting, seeing the intensity of what a woman goes through in birth, and someone who wants to help and wants to kind of, like to know that there's so much you can do, and the rest of it is just this initiation that's extraordinary. And looking back at it, it's always like, wow, it's just so beautiful. But there are moments during the process that are just overwhelming. So yeah, I think it's a cocktail of everything. In the space of just a birth, you can experience like complete awe and inspiration, and then just terror and
When you say terror, you might have to go into that a little bit more for the.
Well, okay. So I think just to be really I think so. There's the moment of feeling overwhelmed because birth is overwhelming, but then there are those moments in birth where it's like, are we okay? Like, are we okay here? Like, is everything okay? Because I don't know anything about the medical process of what's normal and not, and so I think that process can be really overwhelming, and I think we're still integrating. It's kind of that experience of, and I'd love to speak to other dads about their birth experiences, because someone gave me a piece of advice before our recent birth. A mentor said to me, do you have a person you can talk to afterwards, a friend who you're going to call up, because not everything is going to be useful to debrief with your partner. And that was such valuable advice, because I ended up calling on a good friend, and he was the one who I really, Jess and I have debriefed, but it's been so chaotic with Indy as well, and having two, it's kind of, that was really good advice. Like, not everything should be, I'm also thinking about the resentments we're talking about, like not everything should be done in the relationship. Actually, my biggest takeaway is, what is the support system? What's the village around the family that can help ease the process of the transition post-birth? Because that for me is that at least as a man in the process, has been the biggest initiation happens afterwards. So what does that support system look like? So
if we think of the sort of the birth education culture now, we've got the midwife appointments, we've got the different types of birth education courses. Perhaps if people hiring a doula, they're going to get some help there.
Yes.
The modern man today, who is now invited into the birth space, expected to be fully hands-on and emotionally invested and engaged and loving and supportive and know it all in the birth room, which is a lot to ask of a partner. How does a modern man set up a support system for himself in the postpartum, where he's most likely to go through that initiation and going through that realization that this has happened? What would you give advice for a dad who's about to be a dad? And how does he support himself in the postpartum?
I think so. My biggest piece is community, but I'll talk first of all to I think getting getting your house in order, so to speak. Like, it sounds really rudimentary, but it's like, your needs still matter in the postpartum, and the fact that your partner is now like possibly breastfeeding around the clock, up through the night, where you might not be up as much through the night. That doesn't mean that you don't have needs. And so, like, exercise, food, it's okay to need to spend some time with friends. Like, I just remember the first birth feeling so much guilt around any moment that was me taking something for me, because it was like, well, Jess is doing such heavy lifting. It's not fair to want any of that. And yet still having needs, like I'm going to work and I'm like coming home and here's the baby. It's like, it's still round the clock for me in a different way.
Yes.
So I would say getting your house in order in terms of like how do you find ways to exercise really efficiently, because you don't have the hour to get out there. How are you going to manage meals, because you're going to have to probably do a lot more cooking. We had Meal Train set up, which is you could do it through an app called Meal Train, or we'll just do it in another way. But we had, for 2 months, we didn't cook lunch and dinner, and that's like, that's very unusual. But even just 3 weeks of that, and if you don't have the community around you being willing to invest in kind of the meal delivery to get good nutritious food, like that stuff is so so fundamental, I reckon, to thriving postpartum. But the piece that's often missing for me, for men, is the emotional support. And it doesn't need to, we'll talk about DadTribe, this concept that I've been playing with.
Yes.
But it doesn't need to be a group of 8 men that you're working with deeply on the experience of dadhood. It can be one really good friend who you can speak to about anything and who you know is there, and you have that relationship with. Like it's trying to recreate the fact that we live in what is in some ways a villageless environment, and saying, well, you know, I was totally at my edge a couple of days ago, and it was just like, oh, we're doing building work and it's too expensive. There's like the money side of it, and then there's like our son's got reflux, and he's throwing up a lot, and he's struggling to sleep, and it's just so chaotic. And I just messaged him saying, mate, I need a chat. And Jess is like, it's like an amazing moment of grace from her to be like, just take the evening, like go. And we went and had an ice bath together. We sat at the beach near Bondi, and I just offloaded to him for 45 minutes, and we went for a quick meal. And I got home and it was like, okay, like I can do this. Exactly. And he's not even a dad. Like he's just a good friend who is a listening ear, who knows me really well. I get emotional just talking about this. It's like dads really need that. Really, really need that. And I'm thinking of a dad as I'm talking, who I met with maybe a month ago, because I someone I vaguely know, and I just brushed paths with him, and he's become a dad for the second time. And I looked at him and I was like, wow, you are a pressure cooker that is about to blow. Like this feeling of like you have so much pressure and so much undigested and unwitnessed experience of your dadhood. And you can't expect your partner to be the person who's going to then hold space for you. And you don't want it to be her, you know, you need someone else who can hold space for you. And I think I felt very lonely in my first initiation. I still don't have good mates who are dads around me. Like my best mates are not dads. And so I'm now learning that it's okay to lean on men who aren't dads as well. Like just to lean on people who can lend an ear.
Yeah. Wow. It's so powerful to hear that. And I think the takeaway here is for the listeners, you know, set up, you almost have to kind of create your own way, because there isn't a platform for men. There isn't a blueprint for fathers as to, you know, this is how we do this. Often it's, let's go and wet the head. And is that what it's called when you go and have beers in the pub after the birth or something? Is that what it's called?
I have no idea, but that's a great saying. If that's what it's.
Yeah, I think it's called wet the baby's head or something.
Yeah.
I don't know if people do it anymore, but I've heard it a few times. But that is the only thing I've heard, you know, and that is basically go to the pub and have a beer and I guess decompress what just happened. And I think it's meant to traditionally to be done right after birth. So like leave the hospital room, the birth room, and go to the pub. But when you think about it, because men don't have that same transformational process over those 9-10 months and during the birth, when the birth then happens, that's when men have the experience. Okay, here's a baby. This is what we were doing. Oh, here it is. And then all the things that unfold in the weeks and months after that. But I can sort of see how they need a moment to just like step out and realize what happened.
Yeah, completely.
I wonder if that's where it comes from. But so in terms of preparing men in the modern world, I think it's so wise to reinforce that we don't have to do it as a couple to each other, with each other all the time. It's too much, it's too intense. But that men also need to, because this is what women do all the time for months and years after birth, is talking it through. Every little tiny bit gets talked over and over.
Yeah.
But men needs it too, by the sounds of it.
And I would even go so far as to say it's unhealthy to put the weight on the relationship to do all of that talking. Like we probably over-indexed the first time around. Like in really beautiful ways. Our first birth, we kind of made a recording as part of our like debrief, Jess and I, we went for a long walk. Indy was asleep on Jess, and we just recorded the birth and recounted it, like play for play, what happened. Like we did all this, which you can do with the first and probably less after that. So there's, and actually debriefing with you was phenomenal, both births. Like one of our appointments, I think in both cases, we spent 2 hours or whatever it was, just going through the debrief. Yes. So a mediated debrief, because you also have a different lens. It's like a 360 view. You've got the birthing woman, the partner, and then it's like, so that's brilliant. But yeah, I think there's a presence that and it's not to say that that you can't have this with women as well, but there's a presence that you have when, and I found this from the men's work, that you feel when you sit in community or with another man that's different, the way presence is held, than it is with women. And so you can, to be able to sit in and be with like that male or masculine, I should say, that masculine presence is really impactful. Yeah. Yeah.
It's so powerful. We really need to take it so serious in terms of making room for both partners in the relationship. The roles are so incredibly different. And in terms of what you said before, you know, the guilt that you felt first time around for, you know, doing things that you needed to do also, which is work and exercising and whatever other simple things that you had to do. Because in terms of, you know, the research is saying that it's almost 1 in 4, but at least 1 in 10 men experience postnatal depression. And the ripple effects within the household, within the family, onto the children or child, you know, it affects their cognitive development. And so this is to say that it's really serious, that if we don't do something to address our mental health for the woman and for the man in the postpartum, it's gonna have consequences within the family, and it really affects the children. So I often try and prepare in my little way, but I do think that it requires a masculine presence in terms of just, especially in the postpartum, to debrief perhaps for men. And we can talk about DadTribe, which I think is going to be really important. But if we don't plan for the individual within the relationship to have a little bit of space, it's not going to be much, but it's going to have to be a little bit, so that you can actually be present with each other and not just kind of have a layer cake of stress. And like you said, you know, with your dad friend, a pressure cooker of just a lot that happens in we have to have a bit of a plan. There has to be a little bit of leeway, because not doing so, not managing our mental health, our physical health, not eating right, all the different, you know, sleeping is a challenge in its own. But if we don't do a little bit all the time, you can be 100% certain that it's going to affect your family and your children in a negative way. And that's really serious. So it's crucial that we stop ignoring that men have needs in this postpartum phase. And it looks different to the women's. It's a different journey. And so it should be, because we are so incredibly different. So I have loved hearing your realizations and your experiences. And I hope that it can open some doors for other families and men in terms of just maybe exploring some ways they can set up a support friend, a support network, something where they know their triggers are. What are their tendencies for anxiety, stress? Do they have a history of depression or anxiety or whatever else? It's a rabbit hole, that one.
And I'll say, like, I was a pretty anxious kid, but I haven't had like a diagnosed history of anything. I feel like I want to really normalize that. Like I haven't, and the experience of becoming a dad and the aftermath, not just the first 3 months, like the years, there are moments that you will inevitably feel like I am empty. I have nothing. I'm literally on the edge of what I think is possible. And chances are you'll still get up the next day and go to work. It's like in that state, you know, it's like, which is such an act of devotion, but you need to have a place you can go to in those moments. Like you need to know that they will come and it's normal. And where do you go when that happens?
You don't have to be okay with all of it. It is really okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. And our partners don't have to hold it all for us. Tony, let's hear a little bit about DadTribe, and then I will let you go and do your life.
Yeah, sounds good. I've loved this, by the way. I feel like it's such important work that you're doing. Yeah, really
Thank you.
Powerful work. So DadTribe is actually just an extension on ManTribe. So it's really kind of it's a ManTribe father edition at this stage.
Yes.
But I've just started to think about, there is so much that men share in our programs that are unwitnessed and unshared, and that is doubly so for the process of being a father. And there's so much shared territory. So the impetus for it have been men actually starting to ask the question, do you do anything for dads? And there are kind of enough men asking that, and I just feel so passionate as a dad that dads need more support. All of the things we go through, from how do you navigate intimacy and sexuality in a postpartum and in the years that follow? How do you navigate the responsibility of possibly being the prime earner for a while, or being, for a lot of dads, they feel responsible for that for their households. Just the rawness of actually the emotion. Like, it's quite heart opening. A lot of dads I've spoken to and work with, said they actually find themselves more emotional after becoming a dad. There is something that shifts within you. And how do you navigate? So there's so much and so much navigated in isolation. So the excitement is this opportunity to bring dads together and to go through an equivalent kind of experience, a 3-month program with other dads, where they work really intimately to witness one another's journeys, but then also, to help support the initiation that's happening. And that initiation happens, I imagine, over decades as you become different stages. But really, I'm thinking in the first 5 to 10 years, that process of actually becoming initiated into someone who might experience emotion differently, into someone who might be responsible for a family in a different way, for someone who maybe has to let go a bit of the narcissistic tendencies that every human has, because now it's not all about you anymore. So there's all this stuff that men should be exploring together with other men. And the exciting part for me is what happens afterwards, because I feel like to have other dads that they're deeply connected to be able to do play dates and to actually have the family relationships that can emerge. That's we need like generative community building, some of the stuff that you do work. We need more of that. People can feel connected, and especially post-COVID can feel like there's a sense of intimacy with community. Yeah,
it's so true. That sounds amazing. And so a man could join that at any stage of his fatherhood journey, or would it definitely be postpartum in that?
So I would say have to be a dad. So have to have had the birth at least the day before the program starts.
That is the requirement.
That's the requirement. And I imagine a dad of I've had work on the men's program with dads that have kids in their 20s. Like I think a dad, the intent is that it's probably in the first, I'd say, 5 to 10 years, likely the first 5 to 7 years, because I feel like there is value in having men who are transitioning into that process of actually stepping into fatherhood genuinely, which doesn't happen in a week, a month, or even a year. Going on the journey together, and also inspiring each other around what's the gold standard of dad, being a dad, and holding one another accountable to great dadding. And part of that's accountable to look after themselves when they're not doing that, and be responsible to look after themselves.
Great dadding. It's time for great dadding. I love it. Yes, that is it. We need a new gold standard. And as we said in the very beginning, this is it's a newfound way that we're doing now with fathers in the birth rooms and so on. And so this is exactly where it needs to go in terms of that community and doing it the man way. It's such an illusion that fathers can just carry on and go to work and not have any feelings whatsoever. That is totally ridiculous, and it's not working for anyone. I wanted to mention this earlier, that men have a hormonal change during pregnancy. So although we've been saying that there isn't much of a change for men, hormonally, there is an actual change. And so men's mood and hormonal chemistry is changing very early on in the pregnancy.
That's interesting.
So that means that moods and responses, masculinity, it's changing, and it's in what it feels like inside the man. And if that is not talked about, then that can feel really unsettling. But I will leave that for another conversation or another podcast.
That's a big conversation. Yeah,
it's a big one. Yeah, but it ties in really nicely there. That's so relevant and beautiful to hear that they're experiencing it. Tony, thank you so much for your time and for doing this. I mean, this is going to be groundbreaking work, because it's a whole new beginning to supporting men during the transition into fatherhood, starting conversations, holding space for them, normalizing it. I'm really, really grateful as a woman and as a mother to know that this is changing, because it has to. So I take my hat off to your work. And, and you as a father.
Let's do this again. Let's do this again sometime.
I would love that. I think there is so much more to be talked about.
Yeah. We'll talk about the rubber ducky 2.0.
Let's do that.
What happens when the rubber duck moves off the ocean onto the river?
What happens then? How about we all get some sleep first, and then we will touch base.
That's good.
We'll see what happens. Thank you so much for your time, Tony. And I will link all your details, how people can find you and join your programs, so that everyone can benefit from your holding space and your wisdom and your support. Phenomenal.
Thanks
Thank you.
So much love. We'll speak soon.